Imani Thomas had just finished a successful fundraiser for a reading program for disadvantaged children in Houston. She smiled as she thought about the eager faces carrying books home, believing that the world was getting better thanks to her efforts. But on the way home, in the middle of the night, a red-blue light suddenly flashed behind her. At first Imani thought, it must be the police patrolling. Then the officer with a cold gaze approached, asked her to get out of the car, and searched every flyer and fundraising gift as if they were evidence of a crime. Each insult, each threatening gesture made her realize she had just entered the forbidden zone, the place where dark power lurks behind the police badge. In that moment, both Imani's dreams and her efforts to help her community were suffocated by fear. But what the abusers did not expect, she was not alone. A fiancé, a tough lawyer, and secret allies in the industry will fan the flames of war. As the light of justice begins to shine through the darkness, the wrongdoers will realize there are people they cannot bully, and the real storm is just beginning. The piercing wail of sirens filled the humid Texas air, their red and blue flashes dancing wildly across the sleek black sedan pulled to the side of the highway. Thick beads of sweat rolled down Imani Thomas's forehead as she gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles white from tension. It was early evening, a time when the sky was painted with streaks of gold, pink, and purple. Ordinarily beautiful, but not tonight. Tonight, all that she could see was the strobe of police lights reflecting off her rearview mirror. She was a 37-year-old black woman, tall and graceful, with a dignified strength that glowed in her posture. But in this moment, dignity was shaken by fear. Her trunk was flung open, her purse lay tossed onto the asphalt, its contents scattered, lip gloss rolling near the edge of the road, a pack of tissues splayed out, her phone precariously close to the storm drain. Two officers, both white, both tense, loomed at her driver's side window. Their presence radiated authority, but it was a kind of authority that felt threatening instead of protective. One of them, a stocky older man with a hardened scowl etched into his features, leaned closer, shining his flashlight directly into her eyes. "Step out," he ordered, his voice tight with impatience. "We need to search the vehicle." Imani blinked against the glare, her heart pounding so loudly it rang in her ears. "Officer," she said, forcing calm into her voice, "may I know why you're pulling me over? I wasn't speeding and—" "Now," he snapped. Her breath caught. She glanced in the side mirror and saw another patrol car pulling up. Adding a fresh wave of red-blue strobing, 3 more officers emerged, 1 woman, 2 men. All of them approached with the same sharp suspicion in their eyes. Imani's mind raced. Was she about to become another statistic, another name in the never-ending cycle of headlines? Black woman harassed, police brutality suspected, tensions escalate on a routine stop. It was too fast, too loud, and every second her fears spiked higher. She unlocked her seatbelt and slowly raised both hands. "I'm not resisting," she muttered softly, stepping out onto the roadside. Cars slowed as they passed, drivers craning their necks to see the commotion. But nobody stopped. Nobody ever did. She noticed the female officer rifling through the trunk, rummaging through her neatly arranged gift baskets. Leftovers from a charity auction she'd organized for children in low-income neighborhoods. The officer flung aside pamphlets about youth mentorship programs, plastic-wrapped snack packs, and a roll of support literacy stickers, all landing haphazardly on the pavement. A fresh wave of humiliation coursed through Imani. She had spent months planning that event, every detail a testament to her desire to uplift the community. Now it was being treated like contraband. "Got something to hide here?" drawled the stocky officer who had first demanded she exit. His name tag read Crenshaw, though it was partially obscured by a reflective vest. He eyed her up and down with an air of skepticism. "Why so nervous?" Imani swallowed hard. "I'm not hiding anything, sir. This is for charity." "Charity?" Crenshaw's voice dripped with derision. "That what you call it?" She could feel anger bubbling beneath her fear. "May I at least call my fiancé? He's expecting me." "I was just leaving an event," she said, her words stumbling over themselves. Crenshaw gave a humorless chuckle. "Oh, you want to call your fiancé? Sure, you can do that if you don't mind spending the night in jail." The threat was too blatant to be a casual remark. She closed her eyes, fists clenched at her sides. This couldn't be legal. No probable cause, no legitimate reason. Imani had been through endless workshops about knowing your rights, but in this real-life scenario, her heart drumming, her mind overwhelmed, she couldn't think straight. Her phone was somewhere near the storm drain, but she was too terrified to reach for it. One wrong move, a quick gesture, and they might say she was going for a weapon. She'd seen the headlines 1,000 times. She'd heard the stories shared in hushed circles at her church or at the community center where she volunteered. So she stood there, frozen in the swirl of flashing lights, the humiliating search unfolding behind her. Then, as if conjured by her desperation, she saw a headlight slicing through the dark. A black SUV roared up, screeching to a halt. The door flew open, and out stepped a tall black man wearing a crisp button-down shirt and slacks, his entire demeanor exuding that calm confidence Imani recognized instantly. It was her fiancé, Bryant Cole, an attorney well-versed in civil rights cases. Over the past few weeks, he'd been busier than ever preparing for an upcoming defense of a protest organizer. Yet no matter his workload, if Imani needed him, he was always there. Bryant's eyes flicked from Imani to the scattered items on the ground and the trunk hanging open. His jaw tightened. "Officer," he said in a controlled, measured tone that barely masked his fury, "may I ask what's going on here with my fiancé?" Crenshaw stiffened, glancing briefly at Bryant before returning to rummage through Imani's gift baskets. "Sir, this is official police business. Step back if you don't want any trouble yourself." Bryant drew a slow breath. "I'm her legal counsel. She hasn't consented to a vehicle search, nor have you provided probable cause. That means—" Crenshaw cut him off, waving a dismissive hand. "Take your attorney act somewhere else. She matched the description of a suspect in the area." He smirked. "And who are you supposed to be?" "Bryant Cole S. And you, officer," Bryant said, stepping closer, "are in direct violation of both the Fourth Amendment and basic decency. Now let her pick up her phone. She has a right to call counsel." For a moment, the rest of the officers exchanged looks. The tension in the air crackled like a live wire. Finally, another officer, a younger man with wide eyes, spoke up. "Let them go, Crenshaw. This is turning into something else." But Crenshaw bristled, refusing to concede. "I'll decide when she goes." He turned, pointing at Imani. "Empty your pockets. Open your jacket." Anger mixed with an aching sadness in Imani's chest. She shot Bryant a desperate glance, lips pressed together. They both knew how these things could spiral. Yet the universe seemed to intervene. Another patrol car zoomed up, its sirens whooping a brief staccato, and out stepped Sergeant Cassandra Owens, the shift supervisor. She was a middle-aged black woman with a no-nonsense stance that radiated command. Her gaze immediately swept the scene, the scattered pamphlets, the gift baskets, Imani's pale face, Bryant's clenched jaw. Then her eyes locked on Crenshaw. "What's the situation here?" she asked, voice crisp. Crenshaw cleared his throat. "Ma'am, we had reason to suspect—" Owens cut him off with a glare. "I'll take it from here." She turned to Imani. "Ma'am, are you all right?" Imani nodded, though her hand still trembled. Owens then nodded at Bryant. "Mr. Cole." "Yes, Sergeant, we have." Owens heaved a sigh that carried the weight of frustration and regret. "Ma'am," she said gently to Imani, "please pick up your belongings. Officer Crenshaw overstepped his authority. We apologize for the inconvenience." "Inconvenience?" The word nearly made Imani laugh, though there was no humor in it. But she stooped down, grabbed her phone and purse, her cheeks burning. Bryant murmured a soft, "It's okay," as he placed a supportive hand on her back. Crenshaw gave Owens a look of pure hostility, but he kept his mouth shut. The other officers watched in silence. The night wind rustled the crumpled pamphlets. A standoff was brewing, but Owens was clearly in command. She gestured to her subordinates. "We're done here," she announced, her voice firm. And just like that, The humiliating farce ended, yet the rawness of it lingered. As Imani climbed back into her car, relief warred with a stark realization. This was only the beginning. That was the spark that ignited the blaze, the first scene of a story that would twist and turn through corridors of power, racism, and moral courage. But how did it all lead to that moment on the highway, with Imani's trunk flung open like a rummage sale for her dignity? Let's rewind 24 hours, when the day started under a vastly different light, sunny optimism. Imani woke to the early glow of morning streaming through the window of her modest two-bedroom home in Oakwood Hills, a suburban neighborhood just on Hastings' outskirts. She had grown up in the city's south side, surrounded by neighbors who looked like her, forging community bonds that felt unbreakable. But life had changed after she took a job as a youth program coordinator, and she found herself in a quieter, predominantly white neighborhood. The change offered more space, a shorter commute, and what she hoped would be an environment supportive of her philanthropic work. That day was special. She was hosting the Read, Rise, and Reach Charity Gala, an event aimed at funding educational programs for underprivileged Black and Latino kids in the inner city. She had labored for months on the details, collecting donated books, signing up volunteer tutors, organizing an auction for local artisans to sell their crafts, and garnering donations from local businesses. The gala was being held at a large community center downtown, a space with tall windows and bright murals painted by local high school art students. By 9 in the morning, Imani was on site, wearing comfortable flats and a flowy blouse, directing volunteers to set up tables, arranging decorations, and double-checking the guest list. The gentle hum of excited chatter filled her with warmth. This was what she lived for, uplifting the community one child at a time. As the hours passed, more than 100 people trickled in. Some were old friends from the neighborhoods where Imani had grown up. Others were local teachers, librarians, small business owners, and even a few city council members who wanted to show public support. By midday, children were running through the halls, squealing at balloon animals, while older kids gathered around reading booths to pick out free books. Imani beamed. The turnout was bigger than she'd dared to hope. Midway through the gala, she checked her phone, half expecting a message from Bryant. He'd promised to attend the final hour, right after a meeting with a community activist group. Instead, there was a text from him. Court hearing got moved up. Won't make it to the gala, but I'll see you for dinner. Proud of you. Love you. She felt a pang of disappointment, but it was short-lived. She knew Bryant was doing crucial work, defending those who often couldn't defend themselves. She typed back quickly, "No worries. See you tonight." The event concluded around 5 in the afternoon, and Imani spent the next couple of hours helping the volunteers tidy up. They packed leftover supplies, sealed boxes of unsold crafts, and gathered unclaimed silent auction prizes. By the time everything was loaded into her SUV, bound for safe storage at the local youth center, it was almost 8 o'clock. The sun was dipping beyond the skyline, streaking the sky with shades of pink and orange. Exhausted yet proud, Imani waved goodbye to her volunteer crew. Just as she was about to climb into her car, her phone buzzed. It was her best friend Paige, calling to congratulate her on the event's success. They chatted briefly about the turnout, the donations, and the sweet moment when a group of fifth graders performed a spoken word piece about reading changing their lives. Imani's heart swelled with gratitude. The day had felt like a victory in every sense of the word. But victories can be fleeting. By 9 o'clock, she was on the highway heading home. She hummed along to an R&B playlist, thinking about how she'd celebrate with Bryant over dinner. She couldn't wait to tell him about the big donations and the possibility of a sponsor for a new reading bus, an old school bus they hoped to refurbish into a mobile library. Life felt so full of promise. And then she noticed the patrol car creeping up behind her. She signaled to switch lanes, trying to brush off the sense of dread. Maybe it was just chance, a routine patrol that happened to be headed in her direction, but it followed her through every lane change, matching her turns. Within a few minutes, The dreaded flicker of red and blue lights lit up her rearview mirror. Her stomach lurched. She eased onto the shoulder, heart already drumming a warning. Had she done something wrong? She was sure her registration was current, her seatbelt fastened, her speed under the limit. Nothing about this stop made any sense. When the officer approached Crenshaw, as she would later learn, he barely said a word. He demanded her license and registration, refused to answer her questions, then had her pop the trunk. Everything about his tone and body language screamed that he'd made up his mind about her guilt before she'd even rolled down the window. And so began the nightmare that escalated from mild inconvenience to humiliating search. By the time Bryant arrived to intervene, Imani felt she was dangling on the edge of a precipice. One slip, one misread gesture could send her plunging into a realm of violence or arrest. Images flashed through her mind. Viral videos, battered black bodies, tearful families demanding justice on the news. She was lucky that Bryant had insisted she share her phone's GPS location with him whenever she traveled late. Lucky that Sergeant Owens had arrived when she did. Lucky. But she resented that sense of luck. Shouldn't it be guaranteed that one could drive home after a charity event without harassment? Now, sitting in her car as the events of the evening replayed in her mind, she realized how fragile her sense of security truly was. She'd poured her life into uplifting her people, and in a matter of minutes she had been treated like a criminal. The question burned in her chest. How many more times would she or others have to endure moments like this? Bryant in his SUV led the way home. Imani followed, the roads darker and quieter now. The bright chaos of the city had settled into a hush. But in that hush, her thoughts thundered. She couldn't just let this go. There had to be accountability. Otherwise, the next time might not end so calmly. When they reached her house, a cozy single story with pale blue siding, Bryant parked in the driveway. Imani pulled up behind him, grateful for the warm glow of the porch light. They walked inside, the air conditioner's hum greeting them. She dropped her keys on the kitchen table, noticing her reflection in the window. She looked haunted, eyes still wide with the aftermath of adrenaline. Bryant wrapped his arms around her, his gaze gentle. "You're safe," he whispered. "You're home." She let herself melt into his embrace, letting out a long, shaking sigh. "I was so terrified," she admitted, "the way they looked at me like I was worthless." "You're not worthless," Bryant said, his voice firm. "And I promise you, Imani, we're going to take action. I know the legal routes. I'll file a complaint first thing tomorrow." Imani nodded, a swirl of conflicting emotions churning inside her. Part of her wanted to bury her head under a blanket and forget the night's trauma. The other part, the larger part, wanted to scream injustice from the rooftops. She wanted to protect every other black woman driving home alone. She wanted to stand up. Bryant's phone buzzed. He stepped aside to glance at the caller ID. Probably his law firm or one of the activists he represented. "Give me a minute," he murmured to Imani, stepping outside to take the call. She sank onto the living room couch, exhaustion tugging at her limbs, and stared at the pamphlets she'd gathered from the trunk. A reminder of the joyful event that had ended in such ugliness. Moments later, Brian came back inside looking troubled. "That was Trey," he said, referring to one of the community organizers he frequently represented. He heard about what happened. Apparently word is spreading fast. Somebody filmed part of the stop. There's a video on social media. Imani's eyes widened. "A video?" "Yeah, short clip, but it shows them tearing through your trunk. People are already talking about racial profiling," Brian explained. "We can use it as evidence if we go to internal affairs." For a second, she felt a flicker of relief. Solid proof. She wasn't alone or invisible. Someone had cared enough to record. Someone had dared to share. But with that relief came an edge of fear. Would this incite retaliation from the police? Would they target her more? She looked at Bryant, reading the same questions in his face. This was a fight they could not avoid. She squeezed his hand. "We have to see this through." He nodded. "Yes, we do." At dawn the next day, Imani woke earlier than usual, slipping out of bed to brew coffee. She couldn't rest, not with the echoes of last night pounding in her head. Over a steaming mug, she drafted an outline of the statement she wanted to make if the media approached her. She'd seen enough reports to know how narratives could twist. She wanted her words to be clear. This was about systemic abuse, not just one officer's bad day. Bryant, ever the meticulous attorney, sat across from her with his laptop, typing a formal complaint letter addressed to the local precinct's Internal Affairs Division. He paused occasionally to ask her details. Exact phrasing, times, the sequence of events. Building a case that left no room for dismissive shrugs. "I'll accompany you to the station," he said. "We'll hand-deliver this. Make sure they can't say it got lost in the shuffle." Imani swallowed, anxiety coiling in her gut. She nodded. "All right." They finished their preparations, then got dressed, the tension between them almost palpable. It was the tension of stepping onto a battlefield they hadn't chosen, but felt morally compelled to stand on. As they drove to the precinct, the morning sun lit the city in a radiant glow, the highways busy with people rushing to work. Imani's stomach flipped with every police cruiser she saw. By the time they parked outside the imposing cement building of the Houston Police's 4th Ward precinct, her palms were damp. Bryant cut the ignition, turned to her, and offered a reassuring nod. She forced a smile, grateful for his calm presence. Inside, the precinct bustled with uniformed officers, plainclothes detectives, and a few civilians waiting around. The air smelled of cheap coffee and stale tension. A wooden sign directed them to the Internal Affairs office. They walked down a corridor lined with fluorescent lights flickering in a dull hum. Sergeant Michelle Welch, a no-nonsense black woman in her early 50s, sat behind the desk. She peered over her reading glasses at them. "Can I help you?" Bryant cleared his throat. "Yes. I'd like to file a formal complaint regarding an incident of unlawful search, racial profiling, and harassment." He set the paperwork on the counter. "This is for Officer Crenshaw and any others involved in the stop last night." Welch glanced at the forms, lips tightening. "You have evidence?" "Yes," Bryant said. "Witness accounts, a phone video circulating online, and Ms. Thomas here can personally testify she's the victim." He gestured at Imani. Imani stepped forward, heart hammering. "I was detained without cause, forced out of my vehicle, and my belongings were searched. It was all caught on camera." Welch pressed her lips into a thin line. "All right, we'll record your statement. Have a seat." She motioned to some worn plastic chairs. "I'll pass this to Lieutenant Ash. She handles these complaints." They waited, the minutes stretching into what felt like hours. Finally, Lieutenant Ash, a wiry white woman with streaks of gray in her hair, emerged from a back office. She introduced herself curtly, led them to a small conference room, and offered them a seat. A tape recorder sat on the table. They gave their statements in detail. The initial stop, the intimidation, the rummaged trunk, Crenshaw's mocking tone. Ash's expression remained unreadable, her pen scratching on a notepad. When they finished, she switched off the tape recorder. "We'll investigate," she said, her tone carefully neutral. "You understand this process can take time." Imani clenched her jaw. "We understand, but we need this handled with transparency." Ashe stood. The meeting clearly concluded. "We handle all complaints thoroughly, Miss Thomas. You'll hear back from us." They left the station, uncertain whether they'd achieved anything beyond a stifling protocol. The police had a way of investigating themselves, sometimes swiftly absolving their own. But it was a start. As they emerged into the bright late-morning sun, Bryant put an arm around her shoulders. "We did the right thing," he said softly. "The truth has to start somewhere." For a few hours, Imani believed that maybe, just maybe, the complaint would lead to real consequences for Crenshaw. She even felt a surge of hope, replaying the idea that justice might be served. Yet by evening that hope was already under siege. She stepped out of her volunteer shift at the youth center around 6 that night and noticed a glaring orange parking violation on her windshield. She frowned. The sign clearly said visitor parking was allowed until 7 p.m. Baffled, she tore the ticket off, scanning for the reason. Vehicle improperly parked in a restricted zone. That was nonsense. Across the street, a patrol car idled. Her heart sank when she recognized the smug face behind the wheel, Officer Crenshaw, half smiling like a cat eyeing a cornered mouse. She locked eyes with him, fury and apprehension mingling in her chest. He rolled down the window a crack. "Problem, Miss Thomas?" She strode over, brandishing the ticket. "You know I'm not illegally parked." Crenshaw shrugged. "Could be I'm just doing my job, or maybe you're the one who's out of line. Harassment won't stop me from filing complaints," she shot back. Her voice quavered despite her determination. He feigned an innocent expression. "I'm not harassing anyone. Have a lovely evening." Her pulse thundered. She wanted to scream at him, to unleash every ounce of rage, but she bit her tongue. She wouldn't give him that satisfaction. Turning on her heel, she marched back to her car, ignoring the burn of tears threatening her composure. This was a blatant message: drop the complaint or face petty retaliation. That night, she told Bryant about the ticket, her voice trembling with anger. He urged her to remain calm, promising he'd add this to their growing folder of evidence. They were building a case, he said, and every misstep by Crenshaw only strengthened their position. But the feeling of violation, of being followed, overshadowed any comfort from that thought. Sure enough, over the next few days the pressure mounted. She found more bogus citations on her windshield, this time claiming expired plates even though she'd renewed them just a month before. The youth center's director, a kindly older woman named Ms. Grayson, confided that a couple of officers had shown up asking questions about Imani's activities. "They wanted to know if you have any reason to harbor resentment toward law enforcement," Ms. Grayson told her, looking concerned. "Is everything all right?" Imani mustered a tight smile. "Yes, it's fine, Miss Grayson." She lied. "Just a misunderstanding." Inside, she was livid. They were twisting the narrative, painting her as some kind of anti-police agitator. She texted Bryant in a fury. "They won't stop." His reply came swiftly. "I'll contact civil rights groups. We're not alone in this." He was right. She reached out to the Houston Justice League, a grassroots organization known for rallying around victims of police misconduct. Their leader, a formidable middle-aged woman named Harriet Rose, responded within hours. Harriet arranged a meeting, urging Imani to gather every scrap of documentation, videos, photos, times, dates, any possible evidence of harassment. It was at that meeting, in the Houston Justice League's modest office, that Harriet offered a sobering perspective. "They will try to break your spirit," Harriet said, her voice tinged with the wisdom of many battles. "They'll target your livelihood, your sense of safety. It's how they make you back down." Imani swallowed. She recounted the daily stress, the phone calls with Bryant late into the night where they'd fret about who was patrolling outside. Sometimes she'd hear a car idling on her street in the early hours of the morning, headlights off. Once she went to bed with a kitchen knife hidden under her pillow, paranoid but unwilling to feel helpless. Harriet nodded, empathy in her eyes. "We'll stand with you, but the fight might get worse before it gets better." And it did. On a rainy Tuesday evening, as Imani headed to her car from the local grocery store, a single patrol car loomed. The officer behind the wheel was a new face, a young man who stared her down as she loaded her bags into the trunk. She kept her composure, but each interaction chipped away at her nerves. She felt more certain that she was being watched, that any sudden movement might be misinterpreted, that her next encounter could escalate beyond a simple ticket. That dread turned to outright terror one night when she was driving home after dark. She just merged onto the interstate when flashing lights erupted behind her again. Her stomach twisted, remembering how it had felt the last time. This was a different officer. Officer K. Davies, his name tag read, a lean man who approached her door with a predatory grin. "I'll need you to step out, ma'am," he said. Imani forced her voice to remain steady. "On what grounds? Did I break any traffic law?" He ignored the question, motioning for her to exit. Hesitantly, she complied. Rain drizzled on the pavement, forming little puddles around her tires. She shivered, part from the chill, part from fear. Davies claimed there had been reports of a stolen vehicle matching her car's description. She told him he was mistaken, insisted her plates were valid, but he still demanded to search the trunk. Before she could protest further, he grabbed her wrist, twisting it behind her back. "Don't resist," he barked, a vile note of triumph in his voice. Her groceries toppled from the passenger seat, oranges rolling into the street. "Stop!" she cried, panic flaring. "You're hurting me!" He shoved her against the side of the car, slapping a pair of handcuffs over her wrists. "Stop resisting," he repeated. Though she was too shocked to even move, the wet metal bit into her skin. Her phone slipped from her pocket, skidding across the slick asphalt. In it, she had a direct line to Bryant, but it was now out of reach, the screen cracking on impact. She wanted to scream that this was illegal, that she had rights, yet her mind spun, adrenaline surging, memories of horror stories swirling in a dizzying cloud. She thought of Sandra Bland, of other women who never made it home from a routine traffic stop. When another squad car arrived, her heart hammered painfully. A second officer rushed over, an older woman with lined features wearing a concerned frown. "Davies, what are you doing?" she demanded, noticing Imani's cuffed wrists, the scattered groceries. "Let me see her ID." He hesitated, scowling at being questioned, but the older woman was of higher rank. Davies grumbled something, unlocked the cuffs, and practically threw Imani's wallet at the older officer. Her license was fully valid. The older officer looked from the license to Imani, then to, "We've got no cause here. Release her now." A wave of relief, tinted with lingering dread, washed over Imani. She stood, rubbing her sore wrists, tears burning at the corners of her eyes. Davies offered no apology, just a furious glare. The older officer shook her head at him. "We can't keep doing this," she muttered. But they were doing this again and again. And with each humiliation it became crystal clear that there was a coordinated effort to scare Imani into silence. When she finally got home that night, soaking from the rain, groceries ruined, her phone screen shattered, she broke down in tears as she recounted the ordeal to Bryant. Fury emanated from him like heat from a furnace. "This stops now," he said, face taut. "We'll file another complaint, escalate to internal affairs. Heck, we'll take it to the press if we have to. They can't keep doing this." At that moment, she realized the gravity of their choice. To speak up was to risk everything: reputation, safety, peace of mind. Yet to remain silent would mean allowing corruption and racism to strangle their future. As Toni Morrison once wrote, "You want to fly? You got to give up the stuff that weighs you down, and fear is a heavy anchor." Imani clutched Bryant's hand. "Let's do it," she whispered. "Whatever it takes." Early the next morning, the two of them sat in the cluttered office of Linda Booker, a local investigative journalist known for her coverage of social justice issues. Linda's walls were lined with old newspapers highlighting her exposé. Shady real estate deals, fraudulent city council members, and more recently a corrupt judge. She was in her 50s with short-cropped hair graying at the edges, exuding a tough, no-nonsense air that said she wouldn't be easily intimidated. Imani spread out her stack of evidence. Bogus tickets, photos of her slashed tires. She discovered that horror upon leaving the youth center 2 days before. Phone snapshots of graffiti outside her home reading "Snitches Get Stitches," and a folder of complaint documents from the precinct. Bryant added his typed accounts of each traffic stop, including the last dreadful encounter with Davies. Linda flipped through them, her expression growing darker with each piece of evidence. "Someone's definitely orchestrating this," Linda said grimly. "More than one rogue cop. This smells like a coordinated intimidation campaign, possibly sanctioned by higher-ups." Bryant leaned in, his voice low. "We suspect certain officers are collaborating with their superiors. They want Imani to drop her original complaint, make her too scared to stand up." Linda nodded, tucking a stray hair behind her ear. "Typical story. You threaten the status quo, they harass you until you cave. But you two are not caving?" Imani felt a tremor inside but held firm. "No," she answered resolutely. "I can't let them bully me, or the next person." Linda glanced at her watch. "All right, I'll run the story. But this means war, Miss Thomas. The station heads might need more evidence, video, statements from other victims, confirmation of repeated complaints going nowhere. Once we air it, you'll be in the spotlight. They'll come after you even harder. Are you sure? Bryant's hand found Imani's. They exchanged a look heavy with apprehension and fierce resolve. We're sure, Bryant said. Linda cracked a half smile. Well, let's make some noise. A week later, the local TV channel teased Linda's upcoming expose during prime time. The short promo clip flickered across screens throughout the city. Images of Imani's vehicle, the graffiti, the slashed tires, the close-up of a police officer's badge. A stern voiceover spoke of alleged harassment and racial profiling by law enforcement. On social media, Linda tweeted a cryptic message: "Systemic intimidation in our city? Exclusive report soon." Imani's anxiety soared. She woke up every morning expecting the worst. She considered quitting her job, moving to a new neighborhood, or even leaving Houston altogether. But then she'd remember all the kids she advocated for, all the hope she'd cultivated, and she'd plant her feet. When the expose finally aired, titled "Shattered Safety: One Woman's Stand Against Police Harassment," it sent shockwaves through the community. Linda interviewed Imani and Bryant, showcasing the intimidation tactics in grim detail. The camera panned over Imani's bruised wrists from the traffic stop, the hateful graffiti, and the bogus citations. Another segment featured Harriet Rose from the Houston Justice League, who condemned the department's culture of silence and complicity. Overnight, justice for Imani trended on local social media. People rallied, outraged to see yet another case of a black woman's civil rights trampled. A small group of protesters gathered outside the 4th Ward precinct the next morning, holding signs that read "End racial profiling" and "Who polices the police?" The mayor's office received dozens of phone calls demanding an investigation. The chief of police, an older man named Chief Bernard White, issued a wary statement about taking allegations seriously. For a fleeting moment, Imani felt vindicated. The public outcry meant her voice was heard. But a new wave of dread crept in. She knew how systems circled the wagons to protect themselves. She worried about what her foes would do next. Sure enough, a day after the expose, a rock crashed through her living room window in the middle of the night, glass showering the carpet. She jolted awake at the sound, heart hammering. Bryant rushed out of bed and they both ran to the living room. The rock lay among the shards, a piece of cardboard tied to it that read, "Back down or else." The stench of spray paint lingered. Bryant made a furious call to the police, who showed up an hour later with all the enthusiasm of someone forced to attend a dentist appointment. The officer who responded typed a quick note on his phone, snapping a couple of pictures, but gave no reassurance that anything would be done. Imani recognized him from the precinct, a friend of Crenshaw's. She glared at him while he feigned interest in the damage. The next morning, Linda reported the vandalism as well, adding more fuel to the city's outrage. But Imani felt each day turning into a tightrope walk. She was propelled by the necessity of justice, yet every step threatened to topple her into chaos. Meanwhile, Sergeant Cassandra Owens, the same officer who had initially intervened during that first humiliating highway stop, contacted Bryant privately. She offered to share information off the record about how some officers had indeed banded together to intimidate Imani. She said she was disgusted by it, but she feared retaliation for speaking out. After all, the blue wall of silence was notorious. In a hushed meeting at a deserted coffee shop, Owens handed Bryant a flash drive, dispatch logs, body cam timestamps, and some internal emails, she murmured. "They'll disclaim them as technical malfunctions, but this might help you prove a pattern. Don't mention my name in the press or I'll be finished." Bryant thanked her, the gratitude in his eyes weighted with an understanding that she was risking her career. Imani, seated beside him, managed a small, grateful nod. They pored over the files on Bryant's laptop that night, discovering how certain officers had suspiciously lost body cam footage during encounters with Imani. Email chains revealed higher-ups instructing the rank and file to monitor her activities. One email from a Lieutenant Givens read, "She's trouble, stick to her like glue." Another, referencing the charity gala, mocked the idea of bleeding heart do-gooders. The final straw was a set of instructions that basically gave the green light to keep citing her for minor infractions, as if to generate a paper trail to discredit her credibility. "This is it," Imani whispered, goosebumps crawling along her arms. "This is the proof we needed." Bryant nodded grimly. "We'll give this to Linda and to Internal Affairs. They can't ignore us now." They did just that. Linda was nearly giddy at the scoop, calling the revelation the skeleton key to unlock the entire rotten system. She teased a follow-up special report, promising to blow the lid off official complicity. But Brian also took the flash drive straight to the mayor's office, insisting on an impartial investigation. Mayor Elizabeth Rodriguez, a Latina woman who'd publicly campaigned for police reform, faced mounting pressure to act. In an emergency press conference, the mayor announced a task force to investigate police harassment complaints, specifically referencing Imani's case. She wore a stern expression and used phrases like zero tolerance and comprehensive review, though Imani noted the caution in her tone. She'd seen politicians waffle under the weight of police unions before. Yet, as Linda's follow-up report loomed, the hostility from within the precinct only intensified. More than once, Imani sensed unmarked vehicles trailing her, especially late at night. She'd occasionally spot a figure lurking near her fence, vanishing when the porch light flicked on. She set up extra security cameras, but anxiety gnawed at her mind. She dreaded a moment when cameras wouldn't be enough. A week later, Linda's bombshell aired. Behind the badge, exposing a police conspiracy. The broadcast led with an outline of the emails from Lieutenant Givens, footage of Crenshaw's repeated stops, body cam failure logs, and glimpses of Owens's statements her identity concealed. The station blurred any personal info that could trace back to Owens, but the impact was earth-shattering. Citizen protests swelled, "Disband the racists," scrawled across posters. The city council demanded answers at a televised meeting, grilling the police chief about institutional rot. The department was in crisis mode, issuing press releases about rogue elements. Meanwhile, supporters flooded Imani with messages of solidarity. Strangers offered donations to fix her window, to help with her legal fees if it came to that. Her name was now known citywide, but the fight for justice doesn't end the moment you gain public support. In many ways, it only becomes more treacherous, because a threatened beast fights back. Sure enough, 2 days after Linda's report, a black SUV nearly ran Imani off the road while she drove home from a community outreach meeting. She swerved, tires squealing, her heart seizing in panic as she narrowly avoided smashing into the guardrail. The SUV sped away, its license plate covered with a tinted shield. Shaken, she pulled over, sobbing with adrenaline, calling Bryant in a frenzy. That night they slept with the living room lights on, windows locked, baseball bat by the door. The sense of vulnerability was suffocating. Imani woke from nightmares, drenched in sweat, hearing phantom footsteps outside. She felt she was unraveling, but every time she looked at the pile of letters from supporters praising her courage, she remembered this was about more than just her. It was about standing up for all those who had been silenced. A few days later, in a shocking turn, the police chief announced that 5 officers, including Crenshaw and Davies, had been placed on administrative leave pending an internal probe. That same afternoon, Crenshaw was spotted pacing the precinct parking lot, yelling at someone on his phone. A local blogger posted a grainy photo of him with a caption, "Crenshaw rages as investigation heats up." The city buzzed with speculation that more high-ranking officials would fall. Yet Imani knew this was still not over. One rainy evening, she found her front door defaced with red paint. The single word "traitor" dripped ominously. Furious tears stung her eyes, but she refused to let them break her. She called Harriet from the Houston Justice League, who came right over with cleaning supplies and warm embraces. Harriet said softly, "They're lashing out, Imani. It means they're losing control." That night, Harriet stayed on their couch, ready to chase away would-be attackers or glean new insights from intimidation tactics. Over cups of tea, Harriet spoke of a quote she loved. "Truth crushed to earth shall rise again." Imani tried to cling to that hope. The next morning, the biggest blow yet came. Bryant was informed by an anonymous tip that the department had drafted a counter-narrative, forging documents to claim Imani orchestrated the harassment for media attention, accusing her of lying to smear the police. If they succeeded, it could discredit everything she'd done. Harriet and Linda both warned that forging documents was a known tactic. "They'll put the victim on trial," Harriet said bitterly, "and it's disgusting." Furious, Bryant stormed into the mayor's office demanding action. He brandished printouts from the flash drive, old text messages proving Imani's innocence, and threatened a federal lawsuit if the city let the department railroad her. Mayor Rodriguez, cornered by the weight of public scrutiny, made a public statement condemning any attempt to falsify charges. She promised an immediate independent audit. For a moment, Imani thought they might see real justice. Then it happened. The arrests. The FBI, having taken interest in the swirling accusations, raided part of the precinct. Lieutenant Gibbons was led out in cuffs, looking both humiliated and defiant. Officers under suspicion scrambled. Rumor had it that some were already flipping on each other, naming everyone involved in the scheme. The entire city gasped in shock as local news stations showed footage of uniformed cops being hauled away by federal agents. That same evening, Linda reported that multiple internal emails explicitly mentioned Operation Pressure, a code name for systematically harassing problematic citizens who filed complaints. Imani's name was there, among others. The anchor told viewers, "This is bigger than one or two bad apples. This is an orchard of corruption." The phrase soared across social media. Standing in front of her TV, Imani felt a powerful mix of relief, triumph, and a lingering fear that it wasn't truly over. Because even if the orchard was uprooted, seeds might remain beneath the soil, waiting for the right moment to sprout again. Bryant, Harriet, and Linda formed a circle in Imani's living room, hugging each other in cautious celebration. "You did it," Harriet breathed, tears shining in her eyes. Imani exhaled a shaky breath. "We did it," she corrected, "together." In the days that followed, national media descended upon Houston, painting Imani as the face of community bravery. Some headlines read, "One woman stands tall against crooked cops," though she herself felt far from tall. She only felt deeply, deeply exhausted. She had carried an ocean of fear on her shoulders. The city council demanded the chief's resignation, and he complied to quell the storm. The mayor appointed an interim chief who declared a new era of accountability. Press conferences abounded, and the Houston Justice League took the stage to push for long-term reforms. Civilian oversight boards, mandatory racial bias training, greater transparency. People debated fervently on talk shows, in local bars, at Sunday dinners. During that swirl of upheaval, Imani and Bryant tried to reclaim slivers of normalcy, eating breakfast without scanning the street for suspicious cars, taking quiet walks around the block. They were congratulated, sometimes even revered. Strangers approached them at the store to say thank you or to offer support for future lawsuits. Yet every loud noise still made Imani jump. She wondered how long it would take to trust that she wouldn't be targeted on a lonely highway again. Despite high-profile arrests, intimidation lingered in smaller forms. Threatening texts from unknown numbers, a shattered taillight on her SUV. Harriet noted that these were the last gasps of a dying beast. The thrashing that happens when power is cornered. When the FBI eventually charged Lieutenant Gibbons and 3 other high-ranking officials with conspiracy, evidence tampering, and civil rights violations, the city let out a collective gasp of relief. Crenshaw and Davies were not only fired but also faced state charges for harassment and unlawful detention. That was the day Harriet carried a makeshift sign reading "Silence is broken" outside the courthouse, leading a small but spirited group of supporters. The image went viral locally, capturing the sense that something transformative was happening in Houston. Yet, as the months wore on, real institutional change lagged behind the sensational headlines. The new leadership at the precinct promised oversight committees, but budget battles erupted in City Hall. Some officers quietly resigned before they could be investigated. Others tried to claim they were just following orders, distorting accountability. Through it all, Linda kept running investigative pieces. Harriet kept urging policy reforms, and Bryant built a coalition of civil rights lawyers to ensure legal follow-through. Imani, though relieved to see so many complicit parties exposed, felt the emotional toll bearing down on her. She'd wake up some nights, drenched in sweat, convinced she heard the squeal of sirens outside. The youth center where she resumed her volunteer hours became her refuge. She poured her energy into the children's reading programs. Reading was empowerment, an escape, and a chance at a better future. It reminded her why she had fought this battle in the first place. Gradually, as the city adjusted to its new reality, the headlines about her case quieted. Fresh controversies emerged, shifting the public's attention, but the core group, Imani, Bryant, Harriet, and Linda, refused to let the story be forgotten. They organized community forums, encouraging others to step forward with complaints. They testified before the city council, detailing how easily systems can crumble when shrouded in secrecy. One evening, about a year after the initial traffic stop, Imani was tidying up at the youth center when a timid knock sounded at the door. She opened it to find a young black woman with tear-streaked cheeks. The woman explained that she'd been pulled over for a broken taillight she never knew was broken, and the officers had hassled her, implying they might take her to jail. She recognized Imani from the news and came seeking guidance. "I don't want to be silent," the young woman said, her voice shaking, "but I'm scared." Imani gently invited her in, offered her a cup of tea. As they sat in the center's cozy reading nook, Imani said the words that had become her mantra. "You're not alone. There's a community that will stand with you. Don't let fear steal your voice." She realized then that her ordeal had not been for nothing. It had sparked a ripple that reached far beyond her personal circle. In that moment, she felt a new kind of triumph, quieter yet profound, as if she'd turned her wound into someone else's hope. And in that gentle, raw exchange, the entire arc of Imani's fight crystallized. It was never just about punishing corrupt cops or clearing her own name. It was about stripping away the culture of intimidation so that other black women, other human beings, wouldn't have to quake with fear every time red and blue lights flared in their rearview mirror. It was about upholding the dream that in a just society, a traffic stop should be no more menacing than a routine formality. Yes, the system remained. Yes, it would take countless more battles to dismantle the seeds of prejudice, abuse of power, and institutional protectionism. But she'd come to believe in the unstoppable power of collective voices demanding better. As Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. once said, "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice." Through every heartbreak, every confrontation, Imani had leaned on that truth. Sitting there comforting the frightened young woman, she recalled Harriet's words, "Truth crushed to earth shall rise again." She thought of Linda's dogged pursuit of transparency, of Bryant's unwavering legal shield, of Owens's quiet bravery, of the volunteers who had filmed her humiliating stop. They had all played parts in bending that long arc, forging a path forward. At the end of that long, tumultuous journey, though she knew more trials might lie ahead, Imani felt a renewed commitment. The corruption had been exposed, people in high places had faced real consequences, and while the road to lasting reform would be winding, she realized that real hope is not the naive belief that everything will be perfect, but the determination to keep moving forward despite the imperfections. Before the young woman left the center that evening, Imani gave her a gentle hug. "We'll stand with you. You have rights, and your voice matters. We'll make sure you're heard." Stepping outside, the woman looked at Imani with a flicker of gratitude she would never forget. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for fighting." Imani watched her go, heart full, tears pricking at the corners of her eyes. The sky was dark, but in the distance city lights glowed softly, and somewhere among them, people were still chanting, still demanding change. Maybe, just maybe, the morning would bring a brighter dawn. In the weeks and months that followed, life for Imani began to settle into a new rhythm. Although she never lost a certain wariness, double-checking her mirrors, confirming that unknown cars weren't tailing her, she discovered a deeper sense of purpose. She'd become more than a victim of police harassment. She was a catalyst for conversations about race, power, and the fabric of community. Invitations to speak at town halls and rallies poured in. She accepted many of them, encouraged by Harriet, Linda, and Bryant, wanting to shine a light wherever darkness might hide. When the dust of investigations finally settled, the city had changed, if only slightly. A new police chief took the helm, one who promised accountability. A civilian oversight board was formed, albeit with limited powers. Some cynics mocked these changes as cosmetic, but Imani believed in incremental steps. Movements grow from seeds, she'd tell the youth at her reading program. One day you'll look around and see a forest of change. As she reflected on all that had happened, she realized how gratitude and grief can coexist. She mourned the naivete she had lost, that simple belief that everything will be fine because I'm doing good work. At the same time, she felt grateful for each ally who had shown up. Harriet with her unstoppable activism, Linda with her fearless journalism, Sergeant Owens risking her career to share files, the silent onlookers who had filmed that humiliating stop, and most of all, Bryant, who never wavered in love or determination. Occasionally she'd have flashbacks to that first night, trunk contents strewn on the pavement, a mocking officer's voice. It still sent chills up her spine. But those memories also reminded her of how far she had come. And if fear flared, she'd recall a line she heard Harriet quote once, "Courage is fear that has said its prayers." She whispered that to herself sometimes, a quiet balm to keep going. Bryant proposed anew after they finally had a measure of peace. He knelt in the living room, the same space where glass once littered the floor from the thrown rock. He told her he admired her strength more than ever, that he wanted to build a future together where they'd keep fighting for justice. She said yes with tears of relief and joy. They planned a simple wedding, attended by close friends, including Harriet and Linda. They made sure to invite Miss Grayson from the youth center, Sergeant Owens, and even Mayor Rodriguez, who managed to slip away from her hectic schedule to congratulate them. At the reception, Harriet offered a toast. She raised her glass in front of a crowd of well-wishers and said, "Here's to Imani and Bryant. They taught us that even one person can shake a system, especially when that one person stands on the bedrock of truth. May we all find such courage in ourselves." Applause broke out, echoing across the decorated hall. Imani and Bryant exchanged a tender look. Their battle had been grueling, but they had emerged not unscathed, yet their scars were a reminder that justice can be bitterly won, but is always worth pursuing. When the festivities wound down, Linda cornered Imani with a grin, pressing a voice recorder into her hand. An exclusive interview for a follow-up piece. "Any final words?" Imani laughed softly, thinking of all she'd been through, all she'd learned. "Just this," she said. "Stand up for what's right, even when you're scared. Because if you don't, who will?" And so ended one chapter of Imani's journey, though a new one undoubtedly began that same night. For systemic change is never a simple arc. It's a spiral, looping through progress and setbacks, fueled by every voice brave enough to cry foul in the face of injustice. In the quiet afterwards, many people asked Imani, "If you had known from the start how dangerous it would be, would you have done anything differently?" She pondered that question. She thought of the humiliation on the roadside, the nights spent trembling by the window, the heartbreak of seeing the word TRATO scrawled across her own front door. Then she thought of the shining faces of children in the youth center, the relief in the voice of that young woman who'd knocked on her door for help, the tearful gratitude of strangers who said her fight made them feel seen. Her answer was simple: I would still speak up, because the cost of silence is even greater. And there we have it, a story about a woman named Imani Thomas, who faced down an entire web of intimidation and came out standing. Maybe not tall as a mountain, but certainly taller than the forces trying to crush her spirit. In the end, her story reminds us that the fight for justice is never just about one individual. It's about all of us, our willingness to show up for one another, our refusal to let fear overshadow truth. Dear readers, what would you have done if you were in Imani's shoes? Would you have had the strength to confront corrupt power structures, risking your security for the sake of what's right? Or would the fear of losing everything push you into silence? That's the question this story leaves with us, a question as old as humanity and as urgent as ever. If you believe that Imani's battle was necessary, if you think the time has come for a new standard of accountability, then spread the word. Share this story, talk about it, shine light into every hidden corner, because as the saying goes, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And when we stand together, the threat doesn't stand a chance. Reflecting on the journey of Imani Thomas, her terror, her resolve, her alliances, we can extract a few deep lessons for us all. First, the power of collective support. Imani might have been overwhelmed if she stood alone, but the presence of Harriet, Linda, Bryant, Sergeant Owens, and even neighbors who quietly filmed a traffic stop formed a safety net that helped her navigate the storm. Real change often emerges when individuals link arms, pooling courage to face down entrenched forces. Second, the cost of silence is heavier than the cost of speaking out. However terrifying, Imani learned that trying to appease her oppressors by staying quiet would only embolden them. By confronting them head-on, she risked her comfort but saved her integrity, and in the process paved a path for others to follow. Third, the journey is long, and complete victory isn't guaranteed. Corruption doesn't vanish overnight. It morphs, adapts, and tries to reroot itself. Yet every time we uproot a piece of that toxicity, we make room for more honest institutions, more compassionate communities. Finally, hope thrives in the small gestures, like a friend who helps scrub off hateful graffiti, or a stranger who decides to record a stop on their phone. These acts of solidarity become the threads that stitch a wounded society back together. As Henry David Thoreau once wrote, "Disobedience is the true foundation of liberty. The obedient must be slaves." And in Imani's story, we see how her refusal to obey unjust demands liberated not only herself, but an entire city's conscience. So, dear reader, may this tale kindle a spark in you, a reminder that you hold power, that your voice can rattle the rafters of injustice. And if fear ever grips your heart, remember Imani's choice, to face that fear, eyes open, heart resolute, proclaiming that every soul deserves respect and every system owes accountability. Keep your eyes open, your heart strong, and never doubt that a single voice might be the one that tips the balance toward what is right.